this is an incredibly volatile time in the Middle East. I would argue that we have not seen a situation as dangerous as the one we're facing now across the region since at least 1973, and arguably even before that.
Antony Blinken, a top U.S. official, aptly summed up the turbulent situation in the Middle East. From Gaza to the Red Sea and from Jordan to Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon as well as Syria, a regional war tied to the Israel-Hamas battle is brewing across the Middle East, and at the center of it all is the United States, a country thousands of kilometers away, but omnipresent in a crisis, thanks to its military presence across the region and its nearly unconditional support to Israel, as it wages a deadly war on Gaza. Another country that is accused of having its footprints across the conflict is Washington's arch-enemy Iran. The two nations are inching dangerously closer to a full-blown direct war amid escalating rhetoric, especially after the January 28 drone attack on a U.S. base in northeastern Jordan, near the Syria border, which left 3 American military personnel dead and 34 injured. The Islamic Resistance in Iraq, an umbrella group of armed fighters, claimed responsibility for the strike. Washington was quick to blame Tehran for the assault given its connection to the Islamic Resistance, and vowed revenge. U.S. officials have told CBS News that America has approved plans for a series of strikes on Iranian targets in Syria and Iraq, which will take place over a number of days, and weather conditions will likely dictate when they are launched. In the meantime, Iran has denied being involved in the attack and said it's prepared to retaliate while emphasizing that it's not looking for war.
What's your response to Iran? Have you made a decision how we'll respond to the attack?
Yes.
What's your message?
Responsible for the death of those 2 Americans. As we hold responsible to find the weapons which will rescue in front. We'll have that discussion.
We'd like to not deter these attacks in the past. What will be different this time?
ما به آنها میگوییم که شما ما را در میدانهای قبلی آزموده‌اید. ما هم شما را آزموده‌ایم. فصل مشترک ما و شما آن است که یکدیگر را میشناسیم. شما میدانید ما هیچ تهدیدی را بدون پاسخ نمیگذاریم. در این حالی که ما به دنبال جنگ نیستیم، اما از جنگ هم نه می‌هراسیم و نه می‌گریزیم.
As the threat of a U.S. attack on Iran looms, the Joe Biden administration faces its worst crisis and a war it didn't want months ahead of national elections. So is it time for the U.S. to change its Middle East strategy? Can a wider war be avoided in a region that is on fire? Amid a drumbeat by Republicans, Democrats, as well as the media in the U.S., for President Biden to militarily respond, the United States molds its retort to the Jordan drone attack. While doing so, it treads a risky line, where any misstep could embroil Washington and its allies more deeply in a war with Iran and the armed resistance groups in the Middle East. And Biden isn't completely oblivious to such a risk.
I don't think we need a wider war on
While attacks on U.S. troops or bases in the Middle East are not new, they have certainly spiraled since the Israel-Hamas war, which broke out on October 7 last year. The Iran-backed armed groups behind the attacks targeting U.S. military have said that they are acting against America's diplomatic, financial, and military support to Israel's war on Gaza via land, air, and sea. These groups are also protesting against U.S. military presence in their countries, including in Iraq and Syria. A look at the statistics from the first 2.5 years of Biden's presidency, put forth by the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft's Executive Vice President Trita Parsi in an interview with Democracy Now! Shows that there were about 60 attacks by the Iraqi militias against U.S. troops and bases. Since October 17th, however, there have been 165 attacks just in these last 100 days, 66 in Iraq and 98 in Syria. At some point, one of these attacks was going to kill Americans, as warned by observers, and it did on January 28. The U.S., in response to these attacks, carried out airstrikes in Iraq targeting 3 facilities used by Iran-backed Kashif Hezbollah and other armed groups in Baghdad. In a separate attack in the same month, a U.S. strike that left a pro-Iranian military commander dead, killing at least 2 people and wounding 7. The January 28 attack came amid an undeclared war between the United States and Iran, as well as Tehran-affiliated Iraqi Shia militias that have been raging across the region for more than 5 years. And it all started when former U.S. President Donald Trump unilaterally withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran nuclear deal. The Yemeni Houthis, meanwhile, an ally of Hamas and part of the Iran-led Axis of Resistance, were initially only targeting Israel-linked ships in the Red Sea, demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. But recently, the Yemeni rebels expanded their scope of attacks to the U.S. and UK vessels in the crucial Middle East waterway after the 2 nations launched waves of airstrikes in Yemen targeting Houthi sites starting January 11, killing 5 rebels and injuring others. Following the attacks, the Houthis declared an open war against the U.S. and its allies in the Red Sea. Despite admitting that the attacks against Houthis have failed to halt strikes on ships, Biden said the assaults will continue anyway.
Well, when you say working, are they stopping the Houthis? No. Are they going to continue? Yes.
The U.S. and Houthis were part of an indirect war when the U.S. supported the Saudi Arabia-led military intervention in Yemen to contain the civil war in 2015, but the two have never been at war directly until now. In the past 4 months, we have also seen almost daily Israeli strikes against Iran-backed Hezbollah targets in Lebanon, and almost daily Hezbollah strikes against Israeli targets. Multiple Israeli strikes against Iran-linked Syrian targets. An ISIL-launched major terrorist attack in Iran. Pakistani strikes against Iranian targets, and Iranian strikes against Pakistani targets. All this amid a full-scale war in Gaza, with no end in sight, while a vocal lobby in Israel pushes for a wider war with Hezbollah. The burgeoning regional conflict now involves 10 countries: Jordan, Iran, Israel, Syria, Pakistan, the US, the UK, Iran's proxies in Iraq, Lebanon, and Yemen, and 4 major militant groups: Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Meanwhile, U.S. Air Force personnel memos from January obtained by The Intercept describes military orders to troops deployed last year to Iraq to be on standby to forward deploy as support troops in the case of on-ground U.S. involvement in the Israel-Hamas war. While the documents do not suggest that U.S. military ground involvement in the war is forthcoming, the January memo is the latest intimation of the Pentagon's preparations to support Israel. Iran, however, maintains that it has nothing to do with the attacks by Middle East armed groups on Israel or U.S. troops, a claim which some observers see as an attempt by Tehran to undermine its role.
ببینید مقاومت توی منطقه بر اساس آنچه را که تصمیم و سیاست خودش هست نسبت به حضور تجاوزگرانه آمریکا اقدام میکنه و به هر امکانی رو که تشخیص بده عمل.
Washington, in the meantime, continues to accuse Tehran of supporting the attacks.
So the attacks that have taken place since October on our forces, on our personnel, in both Iraq and Syria, have been conducted by groups that are aligned with Iran, and indeed are supported by Iran, funded by Iran, equipped by Iran.
Amid all the doom and gloom, one respite is the decision by Kataib Hezbollah, which is part of an umbrella group that claimed the January 28 attack, to suspend operations against U.S. forces to prevent embarrassment of the Iraqi government, which is negotiating the complete withdrawal of U.S.-led coalition forces from its soil.
مبررات الوجود كانت لمواجهة داعش. اليوم الموقف الأمني بشهادة كل المختصين في العراق ولدى الأصدقاء، داعش لا تمثل تهديد للدولة العراقية.
The U.S. Defense Department was quick to respond to Kataib Hezbollah's announcement with actions speak louder than words. To bring some order to the region, the U.S. government can use its vast leverage with the Israeli government to agree to a deal to initiate a ceasefire in Gaza, which both Tel Aviv and Washington haven't agreed to yet, and return the remaining Israeli and American hostages to their loved ones. Following this, the Biden administration must push Israel to pursue a two-state solution, which is the only way forward for peace. And if Israel doesn't listen, Biden has the option of going the Ronald Reagan way. At the time of Israel's 1982 invasion of Lebanon, the Reagan administration suspended all military aid and weapons transfers to Israel, demanding a halt to the operation. Today in the Middle East, there is a very real risk of a major escalation in the proxy war between Iran and the US that could prove extremely costly for both parties and the world. And this threat of escalation is not coming from Iran, or its proxies that have been hitting US targets with little success for years. The threat of escalation is coming from the US administration, which could throw the entire region into fire by overreacting to a drone attack that just got lucky.